Hey, what's up, everybody? It is 4 o'clock in the East, 1 o'clock here in Los Angeles. I'm Jacob Soboroff in this afternoon for Nicole Wallace. All right, let's start with the word of the day. What is the word of the day, you might ask? It is a four-letter word that starts with S-H, as in the thing Donald Trump now appears to be throwing at the wall in order to see what sticks. Because at this hour, The Atlantic is reporting that as part of a midterm strategy session inside the Oval Office recently, Trump rejected an approach favored by some Republican strategists. This is an approach that focused not on Donald Trump, given his cratering approval ratings and voter anxieties on the economy, but instead on local issues and individual races and individual candidates, the things that people actually care about. What a thought. It might not surprise you to learn that not only did Trump refuse that strategy, according to The Atlantic, he actually set out in the complete opposite direction. Here's what the reporting says. Quote, the solution Trump settled on, according to three people familiar with the meeting, was to lean into the Democratic strategy of focusing on himself. The president ordered a series of television advertisements about his own record that will serve as a backdrop to the hundreds of individual House and Senate contests. Okay, well, while the rest of us await that particular ad blitz from MAGA Inc., Republicans are also preparing for a first-of-its-kind midterm convention. You heard that right, one that begins 2 weeks from today in Dallas, Texas. I have covered a lot of conventions for this network, but I have never covered a midterm convention. And here comes that word of the day again. Get ready, because one Republican strategist suggested to Puck News that that event has turned into a, quote, shit show, and that few lawmakers actually want to go. Aside from the tens of thousands of dollars that they are being asked to cough up, there's also this, quote, with no party business being conducted, as would be typical at a presidential nominating convention, and poor planning, invitations were sent in the last several weeks, way after lawmakers had already committed to other events, campaign strategists are seething that it's a little more than a fundraiser for an unnecessary Trump production at a time when some swing district lawmakers are not exactly clamoring to be associated with the president. It's yet another opportunity to shake down corporate America, said one Republican strategist, adding the campaign strategists, nobody understands why we're doing a midterm convention. It's just another show that Trump is going to put on to remind the voters that he is sitting there, and maybe they don't want to be reminded of that. You know, the reason they don't want to be reminded of that is pretty obvious. In poll after poll, Americans writ large consistently rate Donald Trump poorly on nearly everything, from his foreign policy to what he has done to the economy, and most recently the trade war that he started with Canada. Should our northern neighbors' retaliatory tariffs go into effect, as they have planned, Americans already squeezed on prices at the grocery store can expect to pay even more prices, higher prices, for some items like paper products. Even one that fits today's theme. Toilet paper. No insert word of the day here. Go figure. Now, with just under 10 weeks to the midterms, Republicans are scrambling to get their you-know-what together, lest you-know-what hits the fan. And that is where we begin today. MS Now senior White House reporter Vaughn Hilliard is here, also with us. Democratic pollster and political analyst Cornell Belcher, plus Charlie Sykes. He is the author of the To the Contrary newsletter. I have to be honest, I had a lot of fun with that. And Cornell, I want to start with you. Please evaluate Donald Trump's apparent midterm strategy here to make everything all about him and not about everything that it is so easy to see Americans going through every single day on the streets of this country.
It really encapsulates the problem that Republicans have and why they're in the holes that they're in. I mean, you look at some polls and you have generic horse race opening up, and you have Democrats favored, and you also have Democrats overperforming, not only in the polls but overperforming in actual election. Almost in every election since Donald Trump was elected, Democrats have overperformed, even in elections that they've lost. Because it's all been about Donald Trump. And you talk to the regular voter on the street, and we hear this all the time in focus group, it's all about him. Like he's enriching himself. Him and his friends are better positioned and reaping the benefits. But regular, everyday working Americans are struggling and wondering what the disconnect is. And this encapsulates the disconnect. He's making this all about him. And it's going to be an entire conversation about him and how great he is and not a conversation focused on that mom in suburban and middle America who is struggling with gas prices, who's struggling to put food on the table, and who's unsure about the future for their children. That's what they want to hear about, not more about how Donald Trump is great. This is a absolute gift to Democrats in the midterm.
Vaughn, all anybody has to do, all the president has to do is open his eyes and talk to some of the people that you and I have met over and over and over again, whether it was in Maine for me last week or Michigan during the primary election. People are talking about how hard it is to do anything. Most people have 2 jobs, 3 jobs, and Donald Trump in focus means the economy is in focus. And Cornell mentioned some of the polling, but there's a Reuters poll, the latest one, says that Americans right now prefer Democrats to Republicans on their approach to the cost of living by an 8-point margin, an 8-point margin. That is a mega reversal from 2024, Vaughn.
Right, and it's not that he's not hearing these voters, he's dismissing them, and he is saying that the affordability issues that they speak of are not attributable to him, that it's Republicans' fault for Senate and Congress, that he's popular. Of course, that runs, as we have made very clear, contrary to what public opinion polling is consistently showing for the president. And how about this, Jacob? Let's just compare, right, to one past president that, right, come a second term, presidents aren't necessarily always popular. If you go back to 2014, Barack Obama, his approval ratings were at 44%, okay? That's a lot higher than the 33% that Donald Trump sits at right now, but comparatively, he kind of had a soft footprint around the country. And, right, even Democrats in that election were running as Clinton Democrats, trying to separate themselves. And Barack Obama and his team understood that there was limited advantageous decisions for him to be on the campaign trail on behalf of some of these candidates because of those low approval ratings. But Donald Trump is completely set apart from the reality that even his own team is telling him about, because as we have reported, that everybody around Donald Trump, all of the associates, the folks with MAGA Inc., to the Senate and House Republican campaign committees, they understand that they have a midterm strategy to execute on, and that is very much separate from what Donald Trump is going to either say on a rally stage, say at this convention, or post on social media at any given hour, Jacob.
It's the words Donald Trump and laying low very rarely are said in the same sentence. And Charlie, the same poll that I mentioned to Vaughn has just barely half of Republicans approving Trump's performance on the cost of living. The Atlantic reporting, by the way, that we mentioned suggests that all Donald Trump's advisors told him that the poor polling reflects the fact that voters, they do not know about his accomplishments. That's what they told him. What does it say about this bubble? Vaughn says they see him. But what does it say about the bubble that Donald Trump is in?
Yeah, Donald Trump is increasingly tone deaf, and we've seen this on one issue after another, whether it's the cost of living or the war in Iran. But, you know, what's interesting is, you know, I live in Wisconsin, and a few years ago, all of the Republican literature was, you know, Donald Trump, had pictures of the candidate with Donald Trump. This year, he has vanished completely. The candidate for governor, Tom Tiffany, is basically saying that his #1 issue is affordability, which Donald Trump says is a myth. So what you're seeing right now, by making the midterms all about him, a referendum on his presidency, I suppose, you know, following the theme of your show, Jacob, is Donald Trump is enshittifying the GOP midterm strategy, which ought to be to distance itself, to run local races that are not tied to a president whose approval rating is now nearing the Nixon line of around 30% or below 30%. And when you're losing on the economy, when you're losing on issues like immigration, most Republican candidates want to talk about something else. And what does Donald Trump do? I suppose, now quoting Ross Perot from the 1990s, that giant sucking sound you're seeing is Donald Trump sucking money from his fellow Republicans and attention from fellow Republicans at exactly the same moment when they want to be changing.
They're
the
desperate
subject.
for it. That's it. Yeah, exactly. And Cornell, these polls are so wild. I want to go to one more poll from the AP. It says 65% of Americans say they've started buying generic or store brands. 64% they've stopped buying certain grocery items. 62% they've cut down on eating out in order to pay for necessities. 46%, almost half, say they've changed where they shop for groceries. This is obviously terrible for Republicans in November, but what does it portend for 2028?
That's a fantastic question, because I think And look, that earlier number where it showed that Democrats are more favored on issues of the economy. Look, I've been doing this for a long time, and Democrats are never. I could make the argument that Democrats are better for the economy, but that's not what voters have always believed, right? Even Bush or Romney, even in the Obama campaign, when you ask voters who'd be better on the economy, it was Romney by a lot. We had to fight that we'd be better for working middle class. But the Democrats have now taken advantage, even on economic issues, is a brand collapse that I just could not have imagined 2 years ago. So what it pertains to 2028, I'm not quite sure, because I think the Republican brand is in such a place that I've never seen it before, because even around issues of immigration, the president has now taken the party underwater on. So how do you define what Republicans are? And sort of, I think the fight for the Republican mantle coming out of this midterm, I think is going to be a really interesting one, whether it goes back sort of super MAGA or do some of the sort of mainstream conservatives, have a candidate that can fight for control of the Republican brand, because Donald Trump and MAGA, they've really done quite a job on the Republican brand. They've got to dig out of the hole.
And how did you define the Republican Party? Not by hosting a quote unquote midterm convention that is all about one Donald John Trump. And when you listen to that man talk about affordability, about what it is like to live in America, it is like he is talking about another planet. He was on with Glenn Beck today. He talked about affordability. Let's listen to this real quick.
They came up with that word, affordability. So I inherit the worst inflation in history, and I have my first news conference the day after I win, and the press is screaming at me about prices. And they especially go, what about eggs? What about this? I said, I'm only here for one day. Give me a chance. I didn't even know. They're talking about eggs. They're screaming at me about eggs. I said, I just won yesterday. I mean, the whole thing was just absolutely crazy. Actually, it was the first day it was on January 21st. I'm having a news conference. I'm there for one day, and they're screaming at me about prices.
Has the man ever even held a carton of eggs? Charlie, during the campaign, he would say, America's going to be affordable again starting on day one. Now he's wondering about why so many people are wondering about affordability.
Well, he's probably not hearing that from Natalie Harp or from his friends at Mar-a-Lago, and also you have it's not just that he's tone deaf. It's also we have been gifted one split screen Marie Antoinette moment after another, where he's not only completely indifferent to the cost of living issue, but almost on a daily basis he's talking about his ballroom with a pond, or building an arch for himself, or hanging around with the crypto bros, or saying, telling people why they should allow the AI industry to ram down more data centers down their throat. So this is a real problem, and to Cornell's point, this is very self-inflicted for Donald Trump, because he became president. He ran his presidential races as a populist, promising that not just that he was going to lower prices, but he was going to be the voice of the common man. He was going to be in touch with the middle class and the working class. And what you're seeing instead is a gilded presidency, is a grifting presidency that appears increasingly remote from the rest of the world, the real world, because, and again, what is he going to do now? He's going to make himself and his golden age now the centerpiece that Republicans are not going to be able to run away from in the midterm elections.
And all you have to do is look behind Vaughn in the building where, this is just my speculation, things from Home Depot have been spray painted gold all over the Oval Office and with signs outside of the White House, to see what that Gilded Age, quote unquote Gilded Age, actually looks like. And Vaughn, I do want to turn to you, because I've just handed some new reporting from you and Laura Barone Lopez about another reason that I think Donald Trump is driving people away from the Republican Party, about how he is actually dealing with elections and has tried, unsuccessfully obviously, to claw back elections that he has lost, and now try to potentially steal an election that he may very well lose again. In terms of his party, he wants lists, your reporting says, of every citizen in every state, of every voter who receives a mail-in or absentee ballot, and of the alleged non-citizens he says are casting votes. I'm reading from your reporting. Tell me more about this.
Right, and just on one point, you know, when you're talking about the political spending, Donald Trump, Jacob, MAGA Inc., it's effectively his super PAC, has $400 million sitting in it. They have spent just under $1 million so far. And so while you see him actively choosing to not spend the literal political capital and cash that they have on Republican candidates around the country, instead, you see them fighting in the courts here over technical legal interpretations in which they are trying to have a USPS final rule, for instance, go into effect that forces states to turn over voter rolls to the Postal Service as a means of cross-checking with the DHS, for example, potential list of individuals that DHS has claimed to be non-citizen ineligible voters. But from our reporting with Laura, that we are hearing from elections officials, not just Democrats, Republicans too, who say that they have little confidence about the DHS's ability to actually provide concrete list of non-citizen ineligible voters, and that from their own conversations with the Department of Homeland Security, that they are deeply skeptical and questionable about their own understanding of the list that they are providing. We are now just 70 days away, Jacob, from the midterm elections, and this is coming at a time in which they are effectively, through this new U.S. Postal Service rule, putting the states in a position of having to turn over their voter rolls and legally be obligated to ensure that there is not a single non-citizen voter on it, or if those state election officials that turn over these rolls potentially face prosecution. There's a lot of dynamics here at play in that it's clearly a focus point of the Trump administration and the legal apparatus around them right now.
Yeah, just in summary, people that I talk to in the election integrity movement will tell you that this is just another obviously blatant attempt to restrict mail-in voting for people who are trying to vote in one of the most not only convenient but secure ways possible that we have in the United States. Vaughn Hilliard, thank you so much for joining us today from the White House and for this new reporting. Cornell and Charlie are going to stick around because when we come back, Canadians, our once very, very friendly neighbors to the north, have some choice words for this administration as the trade war escalates. We're going to play for you what they told my colleague Alex Tabbitt. Plus, by the way, the Trump administration is threatening to demolish the Kennedy Center if Donald Trump doesn't get his way. It is what many of the center's supporters have feared ever since Donald Trump took over this institution. You're not going to want to miss that. And later in the program, there is brand new reporting on the alarming chaos inside the United States military, including a soaring number of conscientious objectors who are leaving the military because they don't want to violate international law. All of those stories and a lot more when Deadline White House continues. After this, do not go anywhere. We'll be right back. Donald Trump's disastrous trade war with Canada has not only inflicted financial pain and stress on the American people, but it is also causing political anxiety for members of Donald Trump's own party, like Republican Senator Susan Collins of Maine. This is a state that shares over 600 miles of border with Canada. Susan Collins called the new Trump tariffs on Canada a mistake. She said this, quote, "I want us to go back to the very friendly, economically beneficial relationship that we have with our Canadian neighbors." Ask Canadians, and going back to that formerly friendly relationship feels like, I don't know, a distant possibility. Take a listen to what people in Toronto told my colleague Alex Tabbitt.
What do you make of this trade war right now?
I'm fully behind what Carney's done. The U.S.
Vice President Vance called Canada a state recently. He said it was a Freudian slip, but this isn't the first time that an American leader has called Canada a 51st state. What do you make of that sort of rhetoric?
I think they should shove it right where it belongs. I like Canada. Canada's Canada. It's been that way all the time. It's been a free country. I know we have some problems in our country, but poor states, we got health care. They look after us, and it's fun being up here. Go down there, what do you get? Nothing. You got to pay for everything. How's that happen? Trump's so worried about trade for Canada. Why didn't he look after his own people? Get smart. Look at us. You get sick, you go to the hospital. You got to come out with a $30,000 bill?
What do you make of this threat about the lake?
I think he should jump in it. Put himself right to the bottom where he belongs. He can't just turn around and take something from Canada.
He's recently threatened to rename Lake Ontario Lake America. What do you make of that threat?
So I think there was also talk about renaming Lake Michigan Lake Epstein.
Sick burn by the Canadians. It is actually the nicest people in the world, Cornell and Charlie, who are back with me, dropping F-bombs and saying things like, I think they should shove it right where it belongs. Only Donald Trump could get Canadians to talk like this. And Cornell, this is like more than a year now into the intentional trade war with Canada, intentional, that Donald Trump has said, and he has yet to explain how any of this benefits any of us economically. What is, I hate to ask, but what is the argument you think they're trying to make for angering our neighbors and driving up prices?
Well, I don't know. I really don't know. It's funny because I was talking to a Republican colleague of mine this morning who has races up around the Great Lakes, and they're really annoyed because this comes at the absolute wrong time. You
Right.
know where this trade war reverberates particularly problematic? Maine, Michigan, Iowa,
Ohio.
North Carolina,
Yeah.
Alaska. What do those things have in common? They have Senate races that are toss up and gone from lean Republican to toss up or lean Democrat. And again, this is part and parcel of it. Look, you have a national wind that is blowing against Republicans already. And Donald Trump with this trade war is just making it worse in those states where Republicans, if they're going to hold on to it, this is why the Senate is, quite frankly, now in play, because of Donald Trump and policies like this and Americans turning against these policies. I have no idea what this trade war is about, because it certainly doesn't benefit Americans. Prices aren't getting lower because of Donald Trump and his tariffs and his trade war. Manufacturing jobs aren't coming back, and we're not growing the economy. So I'm like the rest of Americans asking, why does he keep doing this? Why does he keep putting these tariffs and these trade wars on at these times where we're already hurting economically, and this is not happening? And the problem is, all those Republicans running in those states now have to answer that question.
If I'm not mistaken, I think, like you said, Michigan, Ohio, and Maine are the three biggest trading partners in terms of U.S. states, or three of the biggest with Canada, and all of those seats are potentially up for grabs, Charlie. And it's not just there.
Yes.
There was Republican senators, Senate candidates. They have begun they are slinking away from Donald Trump on the tariff war. Ashley Hinson, by the way, running for Senate in Iowa, called the beef tariffs that Trump is looking to impose, I think she said it was quote, a bad idea. Is this an issue that you can see more Republicans trying to get elected, in November, breaking away from Donald Trump on?
Well, they would love to, right? If Donald Trump would let them break away from him. This is part of the problem of being in Donald Trump's political party, that it's very, very difficult to show any independence. And look, I mean, we just step back for a moment, because, Jacob, I think you're old enough to remember when going to war with Canada, blaming Canada was a bit on South Park, right?
South Park, exactly.
These are the nicest people in the world. Nobody wants to blame Canada. No one wants to go to war with Canada, and yet here we are in this, and the economic fallout's going to be considerable, but also just think about more than a century of trust and relationships with our nearest neighbor squandered for no reason whatsoever, except for Donald Trump's fragile ego and his peak that Canada has not bent the knee. That Canada will not simply roll over, because Mark Carney has been one of the most forceful leaders in saying we need to adjust to a world in which we can no longer rely upon or trust the United States of America. And so this is a black eye for Americans, and it's just tragic. I've done so many interviews with people in Canada where I start off by saying, just so you know, literally no one I've ever met is mad at Canada. No one hates Canada or thinks that Canada is an enemy. And watching the White House right now, and people in the right-wing media try to cast Canada as somehow a proxy of Red China, or somehow a hostile force or freeloaders, that's just not going to land, because they're Canadians, right? We know them.
I just want to give them hugs, is all I want to do to my Canadian brothers and sisters.
That's it.
Charlie Sykes, you're going to stay with me a little bit longer. Cornell Belcher, thank you so much for your insights today. It's good to see you. Everybody else stick around, too, because when we come back, he has already torn down the East Wing of the White House. Now Donald Trump apparently has set his sights on another iconic Washington, D.C. landmark. We'll be right back.
But the tarp's still up. All you can see
is Forming Arts. I don't get why it's up, other than to hide the fact that the president's name's been taken down. What's your name?
Madeline.
Jacob.
Jacob.
Did you come to see the tarp?
Yes.
What do you think's really going on behind there?
I think he's totally embarrassed.
Do you think that's what's going on?
I do.
What does it make you feel to see that?
Ashamed.
Earlier this summer, I hit the streets of Washington, D.C. to see for myself how Donald Trump has physically changed our nation's capital. And there are very few places that have been as transformed as the great Kennedy Center, which was covered up as a result of a court ruling that Donald Trump's name cannot be added to one of Washington's most important cultural institutions. Now what's happening? Lawyers for the Trump administration are threatening to demolish the Kennedy Center altogether if the president's efforts to renovate the structure are blocked by the courts. This is from a new filing by the Justice Department. Their attorneys argued that if the Trump-driven renovations are blocked, quote, the center will deteriorate further into an unsafe, decrepit structure that will be required to be taken down. The DOJ is also arguing that, quote, without the prominent recognition of the Trump administration and President Trump's efforts, the donors will not contribute and the center will continue to be in a financial and structural death spiral. But according to confidential documents obtained by the Washington Post, Donald Trump's involvement in the Kennedy Center has actually repelled both donors and patrons from the center. This is from their reporting, quote, ticket sales have already dropped in the 10 months following Trump's takeover. Both ticket sales and donations plunged after the Trump-led Board of Trustees voted in December to rename the center after him and put his name on the front of the building. I want to bring in the reporter who broke that story for the Washington Post, arts and government reporter Jonathan Edwards, and Charlie is still with us. Jonathan, I have to say, it is amazing reporting. I'm not surprised. What is your reaction to the filing from the Justice Department and the threat of the demolition of the Kennedy Center? Was this something that those folks who are fighting back against the efforts by Donald Trump to change the name of the Kennedy Center ever possibly imagined?
Well, thanks, Jacob, for having me. And yes, absolutely. It's what they've feared ever since October when, without warning, the White House demolished the East Wing. And those who have been concerned about the Kennedy Center have always feared since then that the same thing would happen to the center.
The Justice Department, Jonathan, claims that donor funding is dependent on Donald Trump's name being on the outside of the building. And your reporting very clearly says otherwise. Can you tell me a little bit about the financial burden that the Kennedy Center has found itself in since Donald Trump put his fingerprints all over the place?
Yeah, our reporting found that ticket sales dropped pretty sharply after Trump took over the center in February of last year. But then things really kind of stabilized. It seemed that, the audiences, or at least the revenue, stabilized. But then when the board voted to put his name on the center in December, that's when ticket revenue and donations, fell precipitously.
That woman that I met, Charlie, in the video that we played was walking from Arlington National Cemetery, where she went to see her brother, who she called a war hero, who was laid to rest. And her next thing she wanted to do was walk to the Kennedy Center to see what Donald Trump had done to the building, because, as she said, she was ashamed of it. And I think that folks like her and anybody who's been watching this know that the threat to destroy the Kennedy Center is not an empty one. All you got to do is look at what's happening over at the White House. Do you believe they would actually bulldoze the Kennedy Center?
Jonathan mentioned, this has been the fear, right, ever since people woke up and they took a bulldozer to the East Wing of the White House, which, again, who would have thought that was possible? But again, just the fact that they are now threatening to demolish the Kennedy Center if Donald Trump doesn't get his way. I'm torn between thinking of, the brat on the playground who says, I'm going to take my ball home if I don't get my way,
yes,
and the mob boss who says, nice art center you have there, there, it'd be a real pity if something bad were to happen to it. I mean, this kind of threat, holding this congressionally mandated memorial to the martyred president, John F. Kennedy, hostage to Donald Trump's whims. And once again, this all comes down to the mind of Donald Trump and his desire to put his mark on absolutely everything. And if he can't have it, he will destroy it. I mean, this is, and I think so. On one level, it's absurdist. On another level, this is an extraordinarily revealing story about what he is capable of doing and what is driving his ego and his agenda right now.
You're right. It is baby-like behavior. I have a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old, and this is the kind of stuff that they say and do to one another. By the way, they love each other very much, but I mean, when things go bad, they go like this, the way that the Justice Department is saying the Trump administration will behave about the Kennedy Center. Jonathan, I haven't been there since the beginning of the summer. What's it like there now? You know, we know it was slated to be shut down for the renovations. What's happened to the people that work there?
Yeah, as far as I know, I mean, it's been a minute since I've been there as well, but a lot of them are still coming to work, but it is... you know, kind of what I've heard is that it's kind of like a zombie operation.
A zombie operation. And you would have to think, Jonathan, that these are, just like everybody else in Washington, D.C., dedicated civil servants, many of whom I would imagine, some are probably volunteers that come in for the shows and are working. Others, I would imagine, have worked there for a long time. What do you know about the employees at the Kennedy Center? Because I actually don't think we talk about them enough as collateral damage in all of this.
Yeah, the employees who work there, and especially the volunteers, they all have a deep sense of responsibility and commitment to the center, at least a lot of the ones I've talked to. I mean, especially the volunteers. Some people moved, you know, into the area so they could volunteer, and they've done that for years or decades because they truly believe in, you know, the mission of bringing performance arts to people.
Yeah, it is a real shame. Shameful, actually. Jonathan Edwards, thank you so much for your reporting today and for bringing it to us here on Deadline. Charlie Sykes, thank you for spending so much of the hour with me as well. Good to see you. Coming up next, everybody, why the Trump administration is taking aim at 200,000 visa holders and asylum applicants. You're not going to want to miss this reporting. We'll be right back.
Progressive.
Despite the overwhelming political backlash to their mass deportation campaign, the Trump administration is showing no signs of slowing down their cruelty. And now, what are they doing now? They are taking aim at asylum holders. The New York Times reports this, quote, "The Trump administration plans to revoke the visas of foreign citizens who came to the United States temporarily for tourism or business but have sought to stay in the country longer by applying for asylum. The State Department has begun reviewing such visas, and cancellations are expected to occur in waves. The move could affect as many as 200,000 U.S. visa holders and asylum applicants." A State Department spokesperson told the New York Times that we are making clear that a visa is a privilege, not a right. If the Trump administration's plan moves forward, it would be the largest revocation of visas in U.S. history. These are folks with legal status. And it comes as the Trump administration is working overtime in what can only appear to be an effort to halt any immigration whatsoever. Just on Friday, a federal judge struck down the Trump administration's ban on issuing visas to immigrants from 75 different countries. I want to bring in Andrea Flores. She's the founder of Securing America's Promise, a former DHS official under President Obama and a White House advisor in the Biden administration. Most importantly, she knows this better than anybody else. Hi, first of all, and can you walk us through what it would mean if this were allowed to go into effect?
Well, it would mean that people who have already been found eligible for visas, that they would suddenly have those revoked for no other reason than Secretary of State Marco Rubio using his extraordinary power to do so. And then this administration is looking for any way to deny asylum seekers of their right to seek asylum. Now, that is a law that was passed in 1980, signed into law by President Jimmy Carter, and President Trump is doing everything he can to try and unilaterally take that law away and use his presidential power to do so. But, Jacob, I think what I really want to emphasize is whether it is having federal agents in our streets or revoking visas in the hundreds of thousands or ending temporary protected status, all of this is very destabilizing for American communities. So if you read this headline and think it's just about immigration, no, it affects businesses, it impacts economies, impacts families, and it impacts people who could be sent back to face real harm and persecution.
That is such a good point. Look at what's happening to Springfield, Ohio, in the wake of temporary protected status being revoked for Haitians. And there are Syrians and other people all across this country who are part of the fabric of all of these communities. And then the rug is just being pulled out from everybody, not just the people who came here as immigrants that contribute to the communities, but the communities themselves. There's so much going on in this effort to institute the largest mass deportation campaign in American history and the cruelty of it. One thing I think people who have been following this, including me, who was in Minnesota during the raids earlier in the year, is that today there was a Trump-appointed judge in Texas who ruled against extraditing an immigration agent who was facing charges there in Minnesota over an off-duty shooting. This is a ruling that means now that this agent is going to be released tomorrow. What do you make of this? Is this lawlessness now? Is this more lawlessness that we have seen stemming from the administration claiming that you know, everything they're doing is about law and order?
Well, Governor Abbott has long sided with wanting to create more chaos in the immigration system for his own political gain, whether he did that by sending asylum seekers to cities without their consent or coordination. Now he is saying to the state of Minnesota, even though we extradite people regularly, we will not extradite an ICE officer to face justice in your state. So that should tell every single Texas resident where Governor Abbott's priorities are, which are siding with an ICE officer who could do harm in their own communities and releasing him over simply following the rule of law, ensuring public safety, ensuring basic accountability for an agent who seemed to lie about what he did to innocent victims in Minnesota.
Exactly, and to face justice, and ultimately, if this agent is innocent, to be found innocent. But that now it seems is not going to happen. I also wanted to quickly talk with you about the family of Alex Preddy, because I was very moved by watching their conversation with George Stephanopoulos. He, of course, was killed by DHS officers while he was protecting a woman during the surge as well in Minnesota. And they talked to George in a conversation I think everybody should see. Let's watch a little bit of it.
I was not shocked that he helped somebody. My shock is that he was murdered. And no one has given us the complete truth, or anyone has been held accountable. And it's been 7 months.
There was more effort in vilifying him than pursuing justice, investigating this.
What did he do to deserve to be murdered? To left cold, on the ground, dead? My child. What did he do?
Susan Preddy said there, no one has given us the complete truth or anyone has been held accountable, and it's been 7 months. There was more effort in vilifying him than pursuing justice, investigating this. And that, too, goes to the point of so many of the levers of even internal investigation within these departments have been dismantled or reconstituted to go after protesters, people that are trying to express dissent, the criminalization of dissent. Do you see any way for the people who killed Alex Preddy or Nicole Good to face justice?
I think only if in the midterm elections, Democrats do win control of both maybe the House and ideally the Senate, and there are serious oversight hearings and subpoenas of any officers or DHS officials involved in vilifying Alex Preddy and his family and defaming him. I think there's a permanent loss for this family. And Alex Preddy, is one of the most prominent victims of mass deportation, but what he represents is also just now probably hundreds of people who have been victims of Department of Homeland Security who we do not know about. And immigration may not be a top issue that every American is going to the ballot box on, but everyone needs to understand what's at stake here, which is, will there be accountability for American citizens being killed in our streets because President Trump wants to deport the most people in history? And I hope people are weighing some of those costs and supporting the candidates who will provide the oversight. But as long as President Trump is in the White House and as long as Stephen Miller is with him, their goal is clear. They will continue to choose violence, even against American citizens who get in the way of their immigration goals.
And with that, the dismantling of protected First Amendment activity. As you said, if you care about your First Amendment rights, you don't even have to care about immigration, although I hope and wish everyone does, and immigrants as fellow human beings. It's your rights as American citizens that are being challenged here by this largest mass deportation campaign in American history as well. Andrea Flores, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
After the break, the tech giant Meta has agreed to pay billions of dollars, with a B, billions, over allegations that its products were addictive to young people. We'll have more on that right after the break.
This is a transformational, an agreement that will go a long way in addressing the harms to young people in these United States. And I am so glad that it was a bipartisan effort, and I'm hoping that we can continue in this bipartisan manner to address the ills that are affecting our society, and particularly those impacting our children.
You know, the words transformational and bipartisan are not words we often use to describe something these days, but that was New York Attorney General Letitia James on our air earlier today describing what can only be described as a landmark settlement of up to $17 billion that tech giant Meta agreed to today. To be clear, that is a fraction of Meta's overall valuation of nearly $1.5 trillion. The suit, which was brought by a bipartisan coalition of dozens of U.S. state attorneys general, alleged that kids were endangered by Meta's purposefully addictive platforms. So here are some of the actual changes that Meta agreed to make on these platforms, Facebook and Instagram both. New framework to ensure users are at least 13 years old, disabling push notifications at night as well as during school hours, a 2-hour daily limit across Meta products, and a 1-hour limit on the individual apps. What they call productive pauses to break up daily use, working with parents to protect their kids, also alerting teens about what they call potentially suspicious contacts. Let me tell you something. That is a lot more than Congress has been able to get done. Coming up in the next hour of Deadline White House, why the New York Times is calling the military, quote, essentially rudderless under Pete Hegseth's leadership.
I would encourage every single member of this committee to talk to lieutenants and captains and majors and colonels and sergeants and staff sergeants and sergeants major and specialists who are doing the job right now on the front lines or across the country, and they have seen a sea change in the environment and the morale and the spirit in their formations.
Hey again, everybody. It is 5 o'clock in New York, 2 o'clock in Los Angeles. I'm Jacob Soboroff in for Nicole Wallace. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth can tout his leadership all he wants. But according to new reporting from MS Now, the sea change those actually inside the ranks of the military are experiencing is not a positive one. This is a quote. Nearly 6 months into the United States war with Iran and a year into the Pentagon's decision to launch deadly strikes to kill alleged drug traffickers, the number of service members seeking a formal discharge from the military as conscientious objectors has skyrocketed, according to two groups that helped them file their applications. MS Now spoke to 5 troops who want out of the military because what they saw in recent months challenged their moral beliefs. The reasons they cited included being ordered to violate international law, seeing the civilian death toll as a result of American military interventions surge, and their concerns over extended deployments with no clear mission or strategy. The Defense Department did not reply to requests for comment, but those accounts add to the picture of what the New York Times reports as an army that has been left, quote, essentially rudderless, thanks to Pete Hegseth. From that Times report, it says this. The Army has not had a chief of staff, the service's top officer, since Mr. Hegseth fired General Randy George without explanation in April. And there are no signs that he is close to filling the position, said current and former officials speaking anonymously. Mr. Hegseth has forced out at least 3 senior officers who had been viewed as potential successors to General George. The turmoil